Latino. But, and Angelo Falcone can correct me on this, I think the survey research still says that the immigrants, or the first generation, and maybe the second generation, they primarily identify by their national origin. But that later on, with every passing generation, you begin to get the emergence of a pan-Latino identity. And as far as the influence of Latin America on U.S. society, well, it's certainly happening in popular culture, with reggaeton and all this other stuff that's going on. But also, I would say significantly in when it comes to the issue of race. Latin American immigrants, Latinos, and all the other immigrant populations that are coming from non-European societies, from South Asia, from Asia, et cetera, are complicating, are disrupting, upsetting the traditional definition of how race was I would say, was defined, because it's starting to change. So I wouldn't say that it's the confusion of the people who have to fill out those forms, whether they're going to check off black or white or Hispanic or Pacific Islander or Aleut or whatever it is that they check off. It's not so much their confusion. I think what they see is perhaps something that doesn't make sense, and that is, the way race is defined in this society, still. Okay.
Yeah, it's that the question is who's confused, right?
Right.
Are the forms confused? Which reminds me, I had a student that once did a kind of ethnographic piece about when in the trajectory of school did kids begin to define themselves in a particular way. And she found that kids don't really start thinking of themselves as Latinos, or she looked at Latino kids in particular, until after the 6th grade. And that she had a memorable quote from one of the kids when she asked him, "What does Latino mean to you?" And the kid said, "Latino is another word for happy." So it obviously associated with good things, but not race,
But how much of this is conditioned by numbers? When you have small vanguard populations from all these countries moving into American communities, they're faced with the binary notions of race in America, and perhaps when they're small in numbers, struggle to conform to it.
Sure.
In some way. Once you move to a point where you're the plurality population, do you still struggle to conform to those binary notions of race, or do you simply subvert them or smash them because you no longer have to define yourself in such a narrow way?
Absolutely. You see it like you look at Puerto Rican literature of experiences narrated in the 50s, like P.D. Thomas never mentioned his father was Cuban in his memoir. It wasn't socially relevant difference. Later, Santa Maria Esteves didn't really mention her mother was Dominican until Dominicans registered. So evidently there's a moment of emergence where there's all these Latino groups stop being another kind of Puerto Rican and became socially visible and asserting that difference for multiple reasons.
But there is also a problem. When you look black,
Everything changes, right?
when you look black, when you are, like your skin is dark, there is a struggle. Mm-hmm. And never ends. There is a struggle. And for us Dominican, it's even more complicated. If I ask my mother will say that I'm mixed. And you ask about the mix, she said, well, I'm Española and Indian. African? No, African, no. But when I come here and I grew up here, and I enter the white world, I learn I'm black. So we learn that we are black, Dominicans specifically, in the majority of Dominicans, that we are black when we migrate, after migration. That doesn't happen back in the Dominican Republic. And that's even more complicated, the issue of identity and race.
Claudio?
Just to add one more thing. uh, sometime in the next couple of decades, Americans of European descent will become a minority in this country. Sometime about mid-century, right? I suppose.
2042.
And that you have the.
I mean, I don't know the exact date, but
You're following the exact date.
it's estimated by the U.S. Census Bureau.
Like
that
the
it'll be
census will say,
2042.
at July the 1st at 12 hours, we have the change.
But,
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
just complete that, you know, what I'm just trying to say is that much of the tensions around Latinos at this particular moment in the country, in parts of the country where dominantly that feel threatened or invaded, as I mentioned in my introduction, has to do with this, with that perception that there's something really changing the face, if we have to put in human terms. The face of America is changing, and it goes beyond Latinos. I mean, you have to think the Asian American, the Asian European mix. I mean, this is a country that is increasingly becoming, I think, the first global democracy, multi-ethnic, multiracial global democracy. It's not that we have many other countries with big mixtures of ethnicities, etc. But I think that the meaning for the history of this country and the world will be very powerful when we realize that the United States is and that Latinos in particular, I think what they add to this is not just their own ethnicities and their own mixtures, but also this sense of living with these mixtures. I think this is one thing to take about. The way the different Latin American societies have dealt and negotiated with this these mixtures of colors and ethnicities, etc. And I think this is an interesting contribution also that Latino population will bring to the mainstream, the change in the ever-changing mainstream of what is to be the American society.
The prediction is founded on the premise that current criteria for race is going to stay the same, which might not.
Well, that's 32 years from now. If you took a different period of 32 years in American history, let's say between 1880 and 1912, the question of who was white was radically redefined during those decades. We made room at the table for all kinds of people who were not considered white in 1880.
Sicilians were considered, Sicilians were considered black in many parts of the country, for instance.
Yes.
Hi. This is an idea, my question is based on an idea that I got while both looking at this map and also in regards to your first question. I know that you all care about a lot, you care a lot about Hispanic New York and the whole concept of all these neighborhoods from different nations mixing together. But how do you feel about the problem that's gaining right now of gentrification, especially in these neighborhoods in Brooklyn and parts of Harlem and stuff like that? Do you fear that that these communities are going to go away? Do you think that we should fight to preserve them?
I think gentrification is part of the history of the United States, and not just the United States. Gentrification is a work process. You know, I come from Buenos Aires, right? And the neighborhood where I grew up when I was, until I was 6, but I have my fondest, my deepest memories, and really make much of what I am today. It's a place that is very well known here because it's become a famous destination, one of the key destinations for tourism in international tourism is Palermo, right? And it really, hurts my entails to think that it's called Palermo Hollywood, which is something I found it's, but no, it's not your fault. The fault is the developers in Buenos Aires that make money about that. So this is an international phenomenon. Now, of course, I think that, people will reaccommodate and will find new neighborhoods. Other neighborhoods are changing too, and this always would have been happening in this throughout the history of this country. And it's, of course, a serious problem, but I don't think it will, in the last analysis, I don't think it will change the basic equation we are discussing here. It's certainly a big problem of urbanism and neighborhood distribution, but in the end, the population will be there. I mean, may change the locations, but they will be making noise.
The question is, what do you think?